Shamanic Age. The Shamanic Age represents humanity's earliest form of spiritual awakening, stretching back to prehistoric times, long before organized religion or written language. This era was marked by a deep and instinctual connection between human beings and the natural world. Early humans believed that every element of nature, animals, rivers, trees, mountains, even the wind, was alive with spirit. This worldview is known as animism, and it laid the foundation for nearly all spiritual systems that followed. Shamans emerged as the first spiritual leaders, mystics, healers, and intermediaries between the physical and spiritual realms. Through altered states of consciousness induced by drumming, dancing, fasting, or entheogens like psychedelic plants, shamans would journey to invisible worlds to communicate with spirits, receive guidance, heal the sick, and maintain the balance between humans and nature. These experiences weren't considered supernatural, they were seen as natural parts of existence. During this era, spirituality was communal and experience-based. Rituals were conducted in caves, around fires, or at sacred natural sites, often involving masks, symbols, and trance-like ceremonies. Life and death, dreams and visions, animals and ancestors, everything was interconnected. The Shamanic Age reminds us that the original human spirituality wasn't about dogma, it was about relationship, intuition, and deep reverence for the earth. Early Pagan Age. The early Pagan Age, approximately 10,000 BCE to 3000 BCE, emerged alongside the birth of agriculture and permanent settlement. As humans began cultivating the land and depending on seasonal cycles, their spiritual focus shifted toward honoring the earth, the skies, and the natural forces that sustain life. This era saw the rise of pagan belief systems, which viewed nature not just as a resource but as a living embodiment of the divine. The earth was mother, the sun a giver of life, and the moon a sacred timekeeper. Spirituality became intertwined with the rhythms of planting, harvest, fertility, and weather. During this period, goddess worship was widespread, reflecting the importance of fertility, motherhood, and the creative power of nature. Sacred rituals were performed to ensure good harvests, healthy births, and protection from natural disasters. People built stone circles, altars, and temples to honor deities linked to the seasons, animals, rivers, and the stars. The divine was understood in polytheistic terms, with many gods and goddesses representing specific aspects of life and nature. Spiritual leaders, often priestesses, druids, or tribal elders, led ceremonies during solstices, equinoxes, and lunar events. The early Pagan Age represents a time when spirituality and survival were one, and the divine was experienced through direct relationship with the land. Mythic Era. The Mythic Era, around 3000 BCE to 1000 BCE, marks a profound shift in human spirituality, where oral traditions evolved into structured mythologies that explain the cosmos, divine law, human purpose, and the origins of life. As civilizations like ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, Greece, and China grew more complex, so did their spiritual systems. Gods and goddesses became part of elaborate pantheons, and myths were used to encode moral lessons, natural laws, and cosmic truths. Religion became centralized, often tied to kingship and state power, and sacred texts began to emerge. During this era, the divine was no longer just in nature, it was personified in powerful deities who governed creation, destruction, war, love, death, and destiny. Stories of gods like Ra, Enki, Indra, Zeus, and Marduk explained everything from the seasons to human suffering. These myths weren't just entertainment, they were sacred narratives that shaped how people viewed the world and their role in it. Through myth, humans found order in chaos and meaning in mystery. Temples were built as homes for the gods, and priests became full-time spiritual mediators. Rituals, sacrifices, and festivals were formalized. Cosmic events like eclipses, floods, or droughts were interpreted as the will of the gods. This era also gave rise to sacred literature, such as the Rig Veda, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and early parts of the Torah. Axial Age. The Axial Age approximately 800 BCE to 200 BCE, is considered one of the most transformative periods in human spiritual history. Coined by philosopher Karl Jaspers, this era witnessed a simultaneous and independent emergence of moral philosophy, introspection, and spiritual awakening across different parts of the world. In regions as diverse as India, China, Greece, Persia, and Israel, thinkers and spiritual leaders began to question the nature of reality, the self, and the divine. This shift moved humanity away from myth-based religion toward inner transformation and universal truth. Key figures of the Axial Age include the Buddha in India, Confucius and Lao Tzu in China, the Hebrew prophets in Israel, Zoroaster in Persia, and Socrates, Plato, and Pythagoras in Greece. Despite being from vastly different cultures, they all emphasize self-awareness, compassion, justice, and the idea that the divine or the ultimate truth was accessible through inner experience, reason, or ethical living. This was a turning point where spirituality became more concerned with the internal soul than external rituals. Religious systems like Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, and Greek philosophy either emerged or were deeply refined during this time. These traditions taught that human beings had a role in shaping their destiny through moral action, and that suffering, injustice, and ignorance could be overcome through wisdom and virtue. The Axial Age laid the groundwork for personal spirituality, ethical monotheism, metaphysics, and later mystical and religious reformation. The mystical age of religion was a time when organized religions solidified their doctrines, yet simultaneously gave rise to powerful mystical movements that emphasized personal union with the divine. While mainstream religions focused on structure, authority, and orthodoxy, mystics sought a direct inner experience of God or ultimate reality. This era saw the spread of Christianity, Islam, and Mahayana Buddhism, as well as the deepening of Jewish Kabbalah, Sufism, and Hindu Vedanta. Mysticism during this age was often a reaction to rigid dogma. Mystics believed that spiritual truth could not be fully captured in books or institutions. It had to be felt, lived, and experienced in the soul. Figures like Jesus of Nazareth, Rumi, Plotinus, Gregory of Nyssa, Padmasambhava embodied this approach. Their teachings spoke of divine love, inner light, unity with the cosmos, and the soul's journey toward transcendence. Monasteries, temples, and Sufi lodges became centers for contemplation, meditation, prayer, and ascetic practices. Mystical writings such as the Cloud of Unknowing, the Bhagavad Gita, Taoist alchemical text, and Sufi poetry revealed symbolic paths to inner awakening. These teachings often used metaphors, paradoxes, and visionary language to describe the indescribable, oneness with God, nirvana, or the eternal source of all things. This age highlighted the universal longing for direct connection with the sacred beyond intermediaries. Though often persecuted by religious authorities, mystics across traditions tapped into the same spiritual current that true awakening comes not through belief alone, but through inner transformation and divine experience. Esoteric Renaissance. The Esoteric Renaissance, roughly from 1200 to 1600 CE, was a revival of hidden knowledge, mystical philosophy, and inner spiritual exploration that flourished in Europe during the late medieval and early modern periods. While the mainstream religious world was dominated by rigid doctrine and institutional power, especially within the Catholic Church, a parallel current of thought emerged among philosophers, mystics, and alchemists who sought personal enlightenment through secret wisdom. This period saw a resurgence of Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Neoplatonism, alchemy, and early forms of occult science. Fueled by translations of ancient texts from Greece, Egypt, and the Islamic world, European thinkers began reconnecting with ideas that had long been suppressed or forgotten. The Corpus Hermeticum, once buried in obscurity, reintroduced the notion that humans possess a divine spark capable of uniting with the cosmos. Alchemists like Paracelsus and Nicholas Flamel pursued spiritual transmutation, the purification of the soul. Meanwhile, Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart offered bold visions of union with God that defied conventional theology. Secret societies and esoteric schools such as the Rosicrucians began forming, preserving mystical knowledge and passing it through initiation. Art, science, and spirituality were no longer seen as separate paths, but as interconnected ways to access divine truth. The Esoteric Renaissance was a bridge between ancient spiritual wisdom and the modern world. Enlightenment and Spiritual Rebellion. The Enlightenment and Spiritual Rebellion era was a time of dramatic transformation where reason and science began to challenge religious authority and individuals sought new spiritual paths. This period, known as the Age of Enlightenment, emphasized logic, empirical knowledge, and human rights, but beneath the surface, a powerful undercurrent of spiritual rebellion was growing. People began to question not only political power, but also the monopoly of religion over truth. While mainstream institutions tried to contain belief within rigid doctrines, thinkers and mystics explored alternative routes to the divine. Mystical Christianity, deism, pantheism, and natural religion began to rise. Enlightenment figures like Spinoza, Voltaire argued for a God found in nature, reason, and moral law rather than in rituals or clergy. Others, such as William Blake, openly defied religious orthodoxy through poetry and visionary art. During this era, secret societies like the Freemasons and Rosicrucians flourished, offering initiatory paths to enlightenment that blended symbolism, mysticism, and philosophical inquiry. These groups often promoted ideals of inner transformation, universal brotherhood, and resistance to tyranny. The Occult Revival and Eastern Influence era, from the 1800s to the early 1900s, was a time of renewed spiritual curiosity that emerged as people grew disillusioned with materialism and rigid religious structures. In response, seekers turned inward, reviving ancient mystical paths and exploring wisdom from the East. This era saw the return of traditions like Hermeticism, alchemy, tarot, and ritual magic, now reframed as tools for spiritual evolution rather than superstition. Key figures like Madame Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley, along with groups such as the Theosophical Society and the Golden Dawn, brought occult teachings to the forefront. This period became a bridge between East and West, science and mysticism, and inner and outer knowledge, laying the groundwork for today's spiritual movements focused on consciousness and personal transformation. New Age movement. The New Age movement from the 1960s to the early 2000s was a widespread spiritual awakening that blended ancient wisdom, modern psychology, and alternative healing into a highly individualized path of self-discovery and inner transformation. It emerged as part of the broader countercultural revolution of the 1960s when many people began rejecting traditional religion, rigid science, and materialistic worldviews in search of personal meaning, higher consciousness, and global unity. At the heart of the New Age ethos was the belief that humanity was entering a new era, an age of Aquarius marked by spiritual evolution, harmony, and enlightenment. The movement drew heavily from Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism, Western esoteric traditions, native spirituality, astrology, mysticism, channeling, and even extraterrestrial theories. It emphasized that divinity exists within each individual and that through practices like meditation, energy healing like Reiki, crystal work, visualization, yoga, and affirmations, people could awaken their true potential. Age of Consciousness. The Age of Consciousness from the early 2000s till date marks a global shift toward inner awareness, personal transformation, and expanded states of mind. Unlike past eras focused on gods or rituals, this period centers on consciousness itself as the source of spiritual experience. With influences from neuroscience, meditation, plant medicine, and Eastern practices like yoga and mindfulness, spirituality has become more personal, psychological, and holistic. Tools like breathwork, shadow work, lucid dreaming, and energy healing reflect a desire for deep healing and authenticity in an increasingly disconnected world. People now seek truth through direct experience, guided by intuition rather than dogma. Concepts like vibration, frequency, manifestation, and oneness are reshaping the spiritual language of our time. This era is not just about self-discovery, it's part of a collective awakening aimed at evolving humanity through compassion, connection, and conscious living.